Hello, my name is Edwin Montes de Oca, and I would like to provide my analysis of why Mark Kushner's speech on the future of architect was highly successful. Judging from the standing ovation that he received at the end of his speech, it's clear to see and to understand that Mark Kushner's speech was successful in reaching his audience and persuading his audience that the future of architect could be much better than it had been, and that, as he specifically stated, we architects and the general public are not on opposite sides anymore, and we can work together to create buildings that are much more useful for the public, as well as being these beautiful works of art. And one of the reasons, or the first reason I would like to highlight as to why his speech was so successful, is the fact that the speaker, Mark Kushner, he understood his audience. It is clear that he took the time to research his audience, and he spoke to them in a way that was not strictly in a manner that would only be understood by architects. He spoke to them in a way that was clear to understand by the general public. They did not need to have a degree in history of architecture or in architecture at all to understand what he was saying and to understand his points. He also clearly explained several concepts to the audience, which informed the audience of architectural history for the past 30 years. He explained, for example, what brutalism was, and how brutalist buildings were these massive buildings that were made out of concrete, which they were so big that they were almost dehumanizing in scale, which was a point that he used very effectively to persuade the audience that in the past architecture perhaps had not taken the general public into consideration. Which leads me to my next point, which is the fact that he organized his speech in a very effective manner to persuade his audience, right? He used the problem, source, solution type of organizational method, which is highly, highly effective in persuading an audience to your point. So he proposed the problem, which was that in the past, or up to this point, basically architecture had not been in communication with the general public, or had not really addressed the general public as much as it should have. And then he also identified the source of the problem, and it was the fact that there was a miscommunication perhaps between the architect and the general public. Sometimes the architect wanted one thing but didn't take into consideration the general public, and sometimes the general public ended up doing something that was not as effective or as beautiful or as cohesive as an architect would have done. And he used examples from his hometown in New Jersey, where he showed an unsuccessful library, and then he showed a highly successful library, which was designed by, of course, one of the star architects of the world, Rem Koolhaas. But perhaps what was his most effective method was the fact that he connected with the audience. He began his speech by introducing the topic in a manner that immediately captivated the audience, because he used an anecdote from his early childhood, which immediately captivates the audience, immediately baits the audience into listening to what a person has to say, because he is talking from his own experience. He's not speaking rather from someone else's experience, but he's saying, this is how architecture affected my own life, right? And that immediately captivates the audience. And the speaker also used small yet adequate amounts of humor, which created a rapport with the audience. It gave a relief to the tension that may be created by a speech, because maybe the audience may be expecting a lecture on architecture, but he used comedy to kind of break up the ice a bit and soften his speech up a little bit. So Mark Kushner's speech regarding the future of architect was highly successful, and it was highly successful because he understood his audience, because he organized his speech in a highly successful manner, and perhaps most importantly, because he connected with the audience. He wasn't speaking from like a perch up here lecturing everybody, but he was saying, hey, I have had problems with architecture myself, so that created a connection with the audience. I hope this analysis has been informative and useful, and I hope it was enjoyable. Thank you.